So these are my disclosures. So first of all, I think it's mostly important to say thank you for the invitation, very kind invitation, and a nice reception coming to this region. This is my first time in Saudi, in the Middle East, so it's been really nice to come here, and thank you for a very nice, kind reception I've got here. So that's the most important message, I think. Jean-Philippe, you asked me to talk about adaptive therapy, and I will briefly review what I think we can use it for, and I will discuss a little bit, maybe creative ideas, but using no margins and maybe no fixation, and maybe as well in the end skipping MR and CT simulation. So some people even suggested now that data is more important than oil, but I'm not sure, probably not correct, but it's very interesting, I think, thinking in our field to think about what we can use with data. And I think we're experiencing a real revolution in the use of AI and deep learning and all of this new data, or the data we have, what we can use it for. And I think the best example we have is probably these ideas of using MR only, like MR only simulation. And we are very familiar with the procedure, obviously, in this community and group. So I'll skip forward a bit, but basically we skipped the CT, and we're using this in my department. So we are scanning only with MR and specific protocols in order to produce a planning CT by some means and deep learning methods. We're using it for prostate and brain at this point, but we'll probably also expand that into other indications later. But I think it's no coincidence that this is actually used for MR only, these deep learning methods, because we have so good input and output data. We have the same patient scanned in different time slots very close by, and that's why we can also use these techniques to really produce good output and use this MR only technique. There is a nice presentation by Emilia Persson. You can look at publication later. So if we have a look at the adaptive ideas, I think basically we have two main uses. There's the real-time adaptation and the adaptation during the course of radiotherapy. I will discuss some of the ideas during this talk. And in our department, we introduced real-time adaptive last year with the tracking system on the Radixact, and I think this is one of the cases we have for lung cancer, and I think the main points of this, or the clear things we can see from this graph, is that it's very hard to actually select a reasonable region for a 4D CT. There is great variation in the infrafraction motion of the tumor. This is based on image-based tracking for these SBRT cases. So it's really large variations. And the other thing is the small yellow bars in the bottom of this graph. And you can see that's related to the measured difference in position. And it's really quite low. It's actually in the range of a millimeter or so. So the precision is quite impressive, I think, and it's working quite well. It's not for all patients, because in some cases it's difficult to see the tumor. This is work by Andrea Horace. So I think that the current status with that MLC tracking is something I worked actually already in 2008 with, so it's very satisfying to see it come to the clinic, but it's also somewhat interesting to see how long time it takes sometimes for technology to really reach the patients, and from conception to implementation is sometimes a really long period. But it's possible to track implanted tumors. We do it for prostate, we do it image-based for lung tumors, and you can take account to translation using a rather simplistic method for promotion. But we haven't yet implemented deep learning methods for localization accuracy, proving that. but we're working on that. And the other thing I think which is remaining is the fact if you have a prostate and treat the lymph nodes, then you will track just the prostate, but the lymph nodes will not move in the same fashion. So you will probably have to include also deformation, and that's not yet in the system. Adaptive radiotherapy is a couple of examples. One is image-based response, and this is a case from Kong et al. Published a few years ago. This is just one of the examples. They take a PET during treatment, and I think that's also a really interesting method. It's quite demanding, obviously, to do multiple PETs. I think the real interest here is can you replace that by CBCT imaging taken during treatment, maybe? How necessary is the PET imaging? Probably you can replace it. I think there's great possibilities of pooling data across clinics, looking at these kind of responses during treatment, and from that also produce new ideas for trials. The second example is you have other biomarkers. We're doing that in our department, looking at the PSA response. Here is a graph from Gunnlaugsson. I'll explain briefly. It's for recurrent prostate treatments. We treat the prostate bed and then look at the PSA response during treatment. And if there is a response, we continue to treat just the prostate. So if the PSA is responding, but if it doesn't respond, then we also expand and treat the lymph nodes. So that's one of the ideas of adaptation. That's the proper trial currently doing a phase 3 trial about that. So I discussed briefly about real-time adaptation and adaptation during the course of radiotherapy based on biology. So I'll continue a little bit talking about anatomy changes, and we had a previous talk about that using the HITL system, so I will not discuss that very much. But I think the technology is extremely interesting, and we have a great potential there. So I'll discuss a couple of things. This was work done by one of my students called Hedda Inaksson. She's doing great work in collaboration with research there. We're looking at head and neck patients, and what you can see is the planning CT, and the dotted lines are the deformed contours based on augmented CT from the ClearRT system. So you take the KVCT and then you augment the quality of the images and the sort of CT quality, and then you deform targets based on that. So I think it looks quite promising. There are some issues, maybe how to handle, for instance, the GTV and other small points, but we are still working on it. I think we got some recently quite encouraging results. Here's another case I'll skip through. But I think the major point of this adaptive radiotherapy is sometimes a little bit underexplored. I think the idea should be to reduce the PTV margin. That could be really helpful for many patients, particularly a case where you have many organs that is close by. So PTV reduction should probably be in our mind, and that might also change the idea of the whole fractionation. So that's something to consider, I think, and really challenge us as a researcher in this field of radiation oncology. This is maybe a little bit too busy slide, but there is a nice review by Lindegard et al. On the art of head and neck patients, and it's really quite a lot of work done. But curiously, there is very few of them that actually did any PTV changes. So I think that's something I would encourage everyone to look at. And this is the most famous fruit, I think, in radiotherapy history by Dirk Varellen. And what he tried to mention here is obviously that the margin could be of the same size as the tumor, and reduction of the margin is quite important. important. Here is another example from a real patient. So does this hold up in radiotherapy, or is it just a representation by Clementine? But this is a patient I got from Kari Tanderup, and looking at the margin and the whole treatment volume, you can see that margin is quite important. Actually, the radiated volume is twice if you have a 10 millimeter margin on this, so it's really important. There is another study by a group, Dutch group by De Jong, and they're looking at ART for rectal cancer. As we discussed previously, there is really great benefits possible with this technique, and reduction of radiated volume by sort of to half is quite possible. We talked about ethos before. I think the main points have been made, but this is from the Danish group. They had pretty large time slots. I think that's really what needs to be reduced in this case, and we have to work on really the speed. That's also something Jean-Philippe mentioned before. This is work in progress by, again, my student Edda Enoksson, and she looked at this time only the target, looking at the CTV coverage of those with a 2 millimeter PTV margin. You have to change from about 70, about 900 fractions. You have to do adjustment, and it's very hard to predict which of these fractions you have to change. So this is also quite interesting. You have to image all the time, and you have to evaluate and maybe potentially change, but it's hard to predict when. This is in line with what Jean-Philippe were also talking about previously. So I think the state of ART in terms of anatomical changes, we have really a high quality KVCT, HyperSight, and ClearRT. We can use deep learning, augmented CT, so we can do KVCT and then augment it, so we have sort of CT-based quality on each fraction, so that's really quite working well. We are using propagation on contours that look mostly convincing. That there is work to do, I think, particularly how to handle the G3, and then online planning is feasible using, for instance, the ESOS system. So one thing we started to think about in our department is actually how to potentially skip the planning CT as well. I talked about previously skipping the CT, so skipping entirely the pre-treatment imaging, and we are trying to see if we can do this actually for spine patients, so palliative patients with palliative intent. We then would like to delineate directly on the diagnostic scanning, create the plan, and then transfer that to the actual treatment during the day. So I think that that would be something to try out. We'll try to do that early next year. Other people have been thinking about this as well, so we are not the first. So I think it leaves us with what kind of imaging do we need for the patient on the day of the treatment, really, and for patients with soft tissue contrast necessary, so like prostate, cervix, and pancreatic cancer, maybe spine SBRT, MR linac could be used. Otherwise, I think probably a CT style linac would be enough. But that sort of leads us to the conclusion. I think we have high quality and geometrically accurate in-room imaging. We can do fast and accurate deformable image registration. We can do sort of fast planning. I think there is work to do on the deformation and the planning part. We can do real-time tracking, but we have some deformation and other issues to deal with it. We can adapt and plan treatment based on response. So that's also really something I think we should work on, and collectively collect data on that, on really big data set. Look at the radiomics image of patients and see how they do respond during treatment. So that's, I think, is a great opportunity as well this week. We should trim margins and potentially think about skipping simulators in the future, as well as maybe treat without fixations. So these are the conclusions. Thank you for your attention.